Hello, I'm Robert Royal, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing and the president and founder of the Faith and Reason Institute in Washington, D.C., which is the parent institution of The Catholic Thing. For those of you who are not familiar with The Catholic Thing, we're a daily column series, not a blog. We pride ourselves on being a cut above a blog. We try to be very careful about producing uh, literate, important text that you can read every day, and it's just 1,000 words. We're very strict with our loquacious authors. We try to keep the length of our columns very short so that every person who receives this, and you can receive it easily into your inbox in your email by just going to our website at thecatholicthing.org and clicking on subscribe. There's no fee to subscribe, and it will come in every morning into your inbox at 6 o'clock in the morning, so it makes it very easy to read. As I said, our charism is sort of brevity, and so we try to keep the length of these columns so that it's not like reading an entire magazine where you need to spend hours, or a long 4,000 word article where you may have to spend a half hour. This gives you a chance early in the morning, and many of the people I talk with as I go around the country tell me that it's one of the first things they do in the morning is they get a cup of coffee and they read these 1,000 words that are about faith and reason, the kinds of things that are important to Catholics and to others in our society these days. And after a few minutes and a cup of coffee, you can have a very good exposure to something substantial about the faith that's going on in the world today. So that's what the Catholic Thing is. And this is the first podcast that the Catholic Thing is attempting. And it's a good time for us to do this. In one way, we're all shut in. As you may notice, some of us may need haircuts and others of us may need beard trims. But it's a time when all of us have a little bit more free time to look at things. And also, we've been encouraged by several people to adopt this format. We've been very successful with our print format, our 1,000-word daily print format, far beyond what we thought would happen when we began it 12 years ago. And that's another reason why we're making this effort right now, because a month from now, we're recording this in early May, but in early June, the Catholic Thing will reach an even dozen, 12 years. The first few years we spent primarily publishing only 5 days a week, the 5 weekdays. And for basically the last decade, we've been publishing every day, which means 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we intend to continue that and to enrich what we've been doing and hopefully even find a larger audience. We have a very large audience, 50,000 subscribers right now, but we're hoping for many, many more than that. So we hope if those of you who see this like the video, you let us know about that, but also that you let people know about the Catholic Thing, which has been a blessing, I know, for my life and for lots of our readers along the way. So with that, let's start the substance of this session. We have with us our senior editor at the Catholic Thing, Brad Miner, who has been with me since, I believe, 2010, Brad, is that correct?
2008.
2008.
Yes, right. Not quite at the beginning. I came in, I don't know, 3 or 4 months in. I was an early contributor, columnist, but we were not yet done with the first year of the Catholic Thing when you asked me to come on and help you organize it on a daily basis.
Right. Now, Brad is, as we'll hear, we'll delve into this a little bit. Brad has had a storied career as an editor and as a book writer himself, and he's been writing a regular column for us, I guess, now since very near the creation in 2008. Brad, why don't you tell us a little bit about your life? I think a lot of people who read the Catholic Thing regularly know me, going back for quite a while, know me through my books, through my appearances on EWTN. But why don't we tell them a little bit about your background, starting with the fact that you're from Ohio and you spent a lot of time around Ohio State.
All right, yeah, absolutely did. Yeah, I was born in Columbus, Ohio, in the old Ohio State University Hospital. So, my roots are deep there. And my father was a professor at Ohio State. He was the chairman of the marketing faculty from the mid-50s until he retired as chairman in about 1970, I think. So I spent a lot of time on campus at Ohio State. Didn't go to college there, but it's very much not only are my roots deep there, but it's in my blood, and I bleed scarlet and gray. Huge Ohio State football fan. My mother, a college graduate, biochemist, pretty much stopped working once she and my father were married, and she quickly became pregnant with my older brother. And then they were suddenly in Columbus, Georgia, not Columbus, Ohio, at Fort Benning, as my father was training in the airborne before he went off to the Pacific War. I grew up in a suburb of Columbus, Worthington, Ohio, went to elementary, middle school, and high school there, and then to college at Ohio University, where both my parents had got degrees. My dad was an undergrad at Allegheny College, Meadville, Pennsylvania, got his master's degree at OU, and then his PhD at OSU. And graduated in 1970, went off to California, lived for a time, and it's there that I became Roman Catholic.
That's right. You're a convert. We ought to talk a little bit about that with the people who are watching.
Yeah. Well, I'd gone to California shortly after my father died. He died at the age of 54 in 1971. And then I went to California looking to sort of jumpstart what was at that point a kind of lethargic life. I had no particular religion. I'd been raised in the Methodist church, but it didn't stick. And I was haunting a bookstore in the LA area called Either Or. And they
Very
had
Kierkegaardian.
yes, very Kierkegaardian, except that it was more, Tibetan than Kierkegaardian, I think. And so there are a lot of books on what they called spirituality. And I started reading books about Zen and picked up one called Mystics and Zen Masters, written by Thomas Merton. Of course, one of the most famous converts, speaking of converts, that America has ever had. And I was astonished to read his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. And then instead of buying books about Zen Buddhism, I was buying books about Catholicism. And pretty soon, I was convinced, particularly by the doctrine of the incarnation, which is something that I wrote about this, not this past Monday, but the Monday before in my column about my conversion. And I know that the good folks at the Methodist Church in Worthington, Ohio, must have spoken about the incarnation in one way or another. And yet, as I said, I don't recall anyone ever saying Jesus Christ is God. You hear Jesus is Lord, but that suggests, sort of the man with dominion over something,
Right.
but not necessarily putting him into the heart of the Blessed Trinity.
We should tell people the title of that column. I think the title was "I Know It When I See It." Is that
Yes,
right? Yeah,
that's right.
It's worth Googling that because it tells the story quite richly. I'm glad you brought up Merton. A lot of people get nervous about Merton. I myself think the later Merton is unfortunate. But that book, The Seven-Story Mountain, was, I always was a Catholic, but The Seven-Story Mountain, I think, is an incandescent book that shows a cultivated, very bright young man coming into contact with the truths of the faith and really seeing how they go into his heart in a very deep, deep way. And it was admired by Evelyn Waugh, who saw the publication of the British version of that book, and many, many other people as well. And in spite of the mixed legacy of Merton at the end of his life, I think that book has had a tremendous influence in terms of drawing people to the faith. And let's face it, God has some unusual ways of teaching people about what is the truth in the world. And that, I think, for many people has been one of them. But speaking of books, you became a book editor in New York City somehow after this. So please tell us a little bit about that as well.
Well, after California, I returned to Ohio and started managing bookstores, became general manager of a chain of about a dozen stores in the Midwest. And then I decided that was good experience to head off to New York, which I did, pounded the pavement for 6 months, doing all sorts of odd jobs. working through a temporary employment agency, but finally landed a job at Bantam Books, which was one of the major American book publishing companies in its day and the preeminent paperback book publishing company. My first job was in sales and marketing, but about 4 years in, they took note of what some of the editors said about me, that he thinks more clearly about content and about acquisition than perhaps even does about marketing and sales. And so I became a senior editor at Bantam. After that, I went to now HarperCollins, then it was Harper and Row, same capacity over there. And then one day I got a call from a friend, Wick Allison, who was publisher of National Review magazine. And I went over there with Bill Buckley's approval and the stamp of approval also from our mutual friend, John O'Sullivan, who was then editor, and became NR's first literary editor, the first guy with that title anyhow.
That's where we first got to know each other, if I remember right.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, National Review in those days, this is the, now we're into the late 80s, early 90s, was a very sociable place. Lots of parties, lots of gatherings. And so it was a way to sort of become familiar with everybody who was doing conservatism, certainly, but also Catholicism, because it was a very Catholic place. The Eminence Grise, Mr. Buckley, John O'Sullivan, Wick Allison, and I, to the extent that we were near the top of the masthead, I was somewhat down the top, from the top, but we're all Catholic. And it's always had at least one foot in Catholicism as well as both feet in conservatism.
I mean, it certainly was a magazine that had a larger projection into the culture as a whole than probably any specifically Catholic magazine at the time. Bill Buckley, of course, was a very dedicated Catholic, and he tended to attract Catholics around him, and even people converting like yourself, and several other people who did that as well. Yeah. Well, that's a fascinating story, Brad, and I'm glad we had a chance to have readers and viewers of this get to know you a little bit better. I want to say again, Brad writes regularly at the Catholic Thing. You may have noticed that we have kind of a regular rotation of writers. I write every other Monday. Brad writes on the other Monday that I don't write. And then we have a series of other people's, Hadley Arkes and David Warren,
Michael Pikulik,
and Michael Pikulik, and quite a few others who are from various backgrounds. But I think I myself am interested because I read the Catholic Thing one day before anybody else does, as Brad does. I myself am interested in what they have to say. And when we started, we made the decision that we didn't want to write this ourselves, that Brad or I could almost write the thing every single day. But it's interesting to let people respond to what's going on in the world, people who are talented, who are very committed to the faith, and have their different perspectives and come in with at times quite surprising insights into what's going on, or another thing, quite surprising insights into some past element of Catholicism. One of the things I wanted to do, and you can go back on our site and look at our inaugural column, one of the things I wanted to do with the Catholic Thing is to point people back to this concrete reality that is Catholicism, because a lot of people tend to think of Catholicism either as kind of a folk religion that you belong to because just the same way that you belong to your family, you simply are that person. Or at the opposite extreme, maybe they begin to think of it as simply a set of ideas or a set of doctrines. When in fact, there's a concrete, I think, historical element to the church that's quite important to know about and to learn about. We believe in the Bible as the history of the world. In other words, God created the world. He chose at a certain point Abraham and the people of Israel to be the conduit through which he would conduct a revelation in time. This is not Buddhism, as Brad found out. This is a concrete, historic set of people who are the conveyors of revelation. And then that revelation comes to fruition in Christ and then goes on in God's new people, which is the church. And so when we go back and we study what happened to the church, the way it expanded throughout the Roman world, the enormous influence that Catholicism has had on culture, and by culture, I don't just mean the arts like music and painting and sculpture, and literature. It's had all that, of course. We can go back and look at great names like St. Augustine and Dante and Beethoven and Mozart, all these other important cultural
Shakespeare.
figures, Shakespeare, perhaps. But the way that the church and Christianity has shaped the world, changed the entire face of the world, this is something too that we want to continue to appreciate. And I think, in my view, that helps to stabilize us. Naturally, we're all going to want to engage these issues that are so burning in our society right now when we've fallen into basically two cultures. One that more or less adheres to the old biblical vision that I've just been describing very briefly, and another that has taken a very naturalistic and materialistic and utilitarian view of human life. And that just sort
Well,
of thinks, well, we get the best deal we can get out of life and then you die and it's all over. And it's no wonder that view, by the way, has led to a crisis of meaning, this sort of existential crisis that people are in. So I'm constantly looking to two things. I'm looking to what's going on right now, and I'm looking back to help us reconnect with those roots that really help us stabilize ourselves and also have a different perspective that I think we bring to what's going on in the world, in the contemporary world, and various issues that we think that we have to face. Brad, this raises another question. Since this is our 12th year,
yeah.
even dozen, as you and I like to say to one another, what are some of your thoughts about where the Catholic thing should be going, say, over the next 5 years? And what do you hope that we will be able to achieve, given here we are in lockdown? We probably won't find ourselves back to anything like normalcy until 2021. That of course diverts us a little bit in and of itself. But if we were just speculating, imaginatively, where do we want ourselves in the church to find us 5 years from now?
I want to preface the answer to that by picking up a bit on what you were, excuse me, just talking about. And that is that as I became a Catholic, one of the things that came back to me was a trip I had made several summers before while still in college to Europe, and going to cathedrals and museums and realizing I was also studying Western civilization in a sequence of history courses in college, and realizing how much of what I had appreciated and loved seeing there was Catholic. It was inseparable from the faith that formed that continent, and that to a very great extent has formed the United States as well. So, and that's why every day at the Catholic thing, not only do you get that rich tradition in a literary way, but you also get it visually, because we put every day into each column some image that is evocative both of the history and tradition or of a particularly important matter of the moment. Could be a news photograph. More likely, it's going to be a work of great art.
Let me jump in here, Brad, and say that
sure.
Because you're too modest to do it for yourself, those images are selected every day by Brad. So if you admire those photographs or the artwork that he selects each day, he takes a lot of time with that and makes sure that has resonances with whatever the writer has written for that day. But I interrupted you. Go ahead.
It's okay. Yeah, you can see Gardner's Art Through the Ages over my shoulder here, and also a wonderful icon by someone I think you know,
Looks
Veronica
familiar.
Royal. Yes, it does. Well, looking forward, it's going to be a combination of the development at the Catholic thing of this extraordinary sense of the Catholic tradition, which is what we have done so well. But we're also, to some extent, we're not provocateurs. We're not in opposition to anything going on in the church, but we do ask solid questions about what's happening. So I think one of the things that our contributors are going to be doing through 2020 and into 2021, thank heavens, we don't have another synod until 2022, which apparently is going to be a synod about synods.
Right.
Well, specifically about synodality. That should be interesting. But we're going to be watching to see, will the Vatican release the details of its pact with China? It seems not to be going well. China is very much in the news today for lots of reasons, not least the coronavirus. But things have gone exactly the opposite, I think, of what one would have expected had that pact between China and the Vatican been something more solid. Similarly, we are continuing to await the report on the Theodore McCarrick scandal. It's been a long time since that scandal broke, a long time since we were promised a report. So part of what we do we're not even the loyal opposition, but just as people who care about the church's traditions, who see the value of the church's traditions, is we want to know, and we'll always want to know, how are the things that are coming from Rome affecting that tradition? Are we in fact advancing the faith, or are we retreating somewhat from it?
Right.
When that 2020 synod happens about synodality, we'll want to count the number of German bodies in attendance, because obviously they're off on a direction that will be fascinating to watch and suggests the very modern sense of doing your own thing, that awful phrase from the 70s.
Yeah, I ought to say for the viewers who are not regular readers of the Catholic thing or haven't been for a long time, that we've also done a kind of a parallel set of reports on the recent synods. I've been to all the recent synods, and we don't quite make it every day because there's just some days when either there's not all that much going on, or there's just, we have to kind of regroup and figure out what's going on. But I've been following the Vatican, primarily doing television spots on EWTN since 2013, when we covered the conclave that elected Pope Francis in 2013. So back then we were called the Conclave Crew. It was me, Raymond Arroyo, Father Gerald Murray, and Father Roger Landry. Father Landry now works at the UN for the Holy See Mission, so he doesn't participate any longer. And as I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this know, that Conclave Crew turned into the Papal Posse. Now, the Papal Posse is a name that gives some people pause, and I want to reinforce Brad's point that we are not against this Pope or anyone else. What we're trying to do is tell the truth. As a Catholic, ought to see the truth, and when we think something is going wrong, to say it respectfully, with all due respect to both the office and the man who occupies that office. The name Papal Posse has an interesting history. That a couple of months after the papal election, Father Murray and I and Raymond were live in the studio, and Raymond said, "You know, we can't call ourselves the Conclave Crew any longer. It's been too long since the Conclave. So from henceforth, we shall be known as the Papal Posse." Now, I want to say this was live in the studio here in Washington in EWTN, and so we couldn't kind of dispute it with Raymond at the point, and then the name is kind of stuck, and it's become almost a trademark at this point. And
Well, I like it.
Yeah, I like it. I like it some days. I like it because it gives us a chance to exercise critical faculties, but also to support when we think that there are things we're supporting that are going on in Rome. But it's interesting, Brad, that you bring this up about China, because there are a number of issues like this. If I had to put it into one formula, it seems to a lot of people who are nervous about what's been going on in these last years in the church that the world has been evangelizing the church more than the church has been evangelizing the world. So that, you know, as much as we know that we ought to be concerned, for example, about the environment, it seems to a lot of people, and it seemed at the last synod, the one on the Amazon, that Pope Francis and some of his closest advisors were almost bordering on a kind of pantheism, where the Pachamama, the earth goddess, has now become somehow accepted almost in an official way in Catholicism. So there are a number of issues like this that I think the Catholic thing, not only in those special reports that we do, but in the sort of daily way we keep an eye on what's going on in Rome, and also here in the United States, because I think lots of people feel that the failure of the report on McCarrick to come out allows this horrible crisis of priestly abuse to continue to fester in our society. And until that thorn is pulled, it's going to be hard to see how the rest of it will be resolved, because one of the highest, most influential figures in the American hierarchy has been credibly, and in some cases it's even been proven that not only was he abusive towards seminarians and older adults, but also toward a couple of underage children. So this, to me, seems to go to the very heart of whether there's going to be credibility coming out of the Vatican or not. And we're going to stay
And it's
on
very,
along with many
it's
others.
very important that we keep this pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important because people in the Vatican somehow have got to understand a bit more clearly than I think they do that though they may object to interpretations put upon the absence of a report on McCarrick, they must know that negative interpretations are almost inevitably to come, because when it is promised that there will be a report and that it will be thorough and open, and then it doesn't come year after year, then one begins to be concerned that perhaps there's something that they do not wish to have revealed.
I've
And
told
so
this I've told this to several higher up people in the Vatican itself, that first of all, they don't have a very, this papacy and the people around him, given their history in Argentina and elsewhere, they don't have a very good idea of the United States. They especially Argentinians and Latin Americans, they have a, I don't think it's too strong to say there's a prejudice against the United States. It may be low level and not prominent, but it tends to be there. And so they tend to look with a hermeneutic of suspicion toward the United States. And so if there's squawking here about the way things are characterized, we remember that one prominent cardinal in the Pope's inner circle said that the initial outrage about priestly abuse in the United States was driven by Jewish journalists, atheist Jewish journalists. I think this is a remarkable thing that a prince of the church would slander not only a country, the United States, but people trying to do their jobs as honest journalists, dealing with what it was clearly a problem of widespread abuse in the church. So I've told them this, and it seems to go in one ear and out the other. But I'm with you. I think that we have to stay on top of this. We have to keep pressing on it, because ultimately the truth is going to come out, and it's better if it comes out in ways that loyal Catholics who care about the church, care about the leadership of the church, seek to encourage them to do something that in the short run may hurt, but in the long run is going to be what is going to be best for the institution and ultimately for the gospel.
Yeah, and we're seeing it playing out right now with regard to the archives of Pope Pius XII, which now are open to historians. And right away, there have been some stories suggesting, the old libel against him, or slander, depending on what form it took, that he was indifferent to the suffering of the people during the Shoah. But of course, others have said, no, that's not at all what the case is. And there's no avoiding the fact that that's part of what happens. When you tell the truth, when you release documents, when you throw them open to scrutiny, then I think you're going to get a divergence of opinion. But if you don't throw them open to scrutiny, well, that's worse.
Yeah, it allows conspiracy theories and all sorts of
exactly
awful things to pull away.
Yeah.
Brad, this has been fascinating, and I think we'll do this again. I mean, I think you and I should do this again at some point in the future. This is, as I said at the outset, only our first attempt. It may be a little raw yet, but we hope to do this on a fairly regular basis. I've got a number of people who have written for us who we're planning on interviewing in the near future. I recently talked with Mary Eberstadt, who's also one of our fellows. Brad is not only the senior editor at the Catholic Thing, he's also a senior fellow at the Faith and Reason Institute, as is Mary Eberstadt. Mary has got a number of interesting books out, including one called Primal Screams, which is about the new identity politics and what it tells us about several of the problems that exist in our society at this moment. I'm hoping that we'll get her in relatively soon, and then many others. And if you have somebody you'd like us to interview, someone you'd like us to talk with, we'd be happy to hear your suggestions. But we've got a break for now, and I hope this has been worth your time for watching. Please feel free to send in. You can go to the Catholic Thing website and send us your comments on this video or on anything else that you see there. We like to be engaged with our readership. We also like to encourage our readership to be kind and to practice Christian charity, which, as we all know, is not always prevalent in social media these days. But let's try to be different. Let's try not to only be different in the way we approach problems, but in the way we talk with one another. I think that too is something that is part of the Catholic thing. One last thought. Some people sometimes—
what the Lord expects of us.
Right. Some people ask me sometimes, this is an ugly name, the Catholic Thing. What is this thing? Can't you come up with some other name? Well, actually, it refers back to Belloc and Chesterton, who, in line with what I was talking about earlier about the church being a historical vehicle of revelation. The church is the mystical body of Christ, continuing his continued presence in the world historically. Hilaire Belloc used to say that by nature I am all skeptical. He doubted everything. He was a very vigorous mind, very intelligent and incisive kind of thinker. But he says, the church, um, God made it, and it made me. He's talking about the church, the Catholic Church. God made it, and it made me. It's a thing, not a theory. It.
Right. Yes.
So the Catholic thing tries to embrace that reality, that objective reality that touches us all very deeply in our hearts, and it has a personal dimension. But the Catholic thing is a way of talking about the whole of what it is that God has put into the world to help redeem us. So let's hope we all can continue that for at least another dozen years, and we hope to see you back sometime very soon.